The nation of Myanmar, formerly known as Burma, has a diverse cultural and historical landscape influenced by various ethnic, linguistic, and religious traditions. Myanmar's influences from neighboring civilizations such as China, India, and Thailand are well documented and widely recognized. However, the impact of Myanmar's northernmost neighbor, Tibet, on the formation of early Burmese civilizations, in particular the Pew city-states, is significant but often overlooked. Today's report will explore the historical connections between Tibet and Myanmar, highlighting the Tibetan origins of the Pew people, the shared Tibeto-Burman linguistic heritage, and genetic similarities between the Tibetan and Burmese populations. One of the earliest known civilizations in Myanmar was the Pew city-states, which flourished between the 1st and 9th centuries CE. Archaeological evidence and historical records suggest that the Pew people migrated from the Tibetan Plateau, particularly from the region around Qinghai Lake, also known as Tsongön Lake in Tibetan or Lake Kokonor in Mongolian, and which we talked about at length in our previous video about the Mongol rulers of Tibet. The Pew brought with them cultural, technological, and agricultural practices that shaped early Myanmar, such as irrigation, urban planning, and fortified city construction. The Pew city-states were among the earliest civilizations in Myanmar, with archaeological sites such as Halin, Beiktano, and Sri Kasetra revealing a complex society that engaged in trade and embraced Buddhism. The Pew are credited with introducing several cultural and technological advancements to the region, including the first urban settlements and the spread of Theravada Buddhism, which they adopted from India. These early migrations likely followed the major river systems originating in Tibet, such as the Irrawaddy River, which provided a natural route for settlers moving southward out of the harsh environment of the Tibetan Plateau and into fertile valleys further along the river system. These facilitated the growth of early Pew settlements and allowed for the development of complex city-states. These city-states formed the cultural and economic heart of early Myanmar, serving as important trade hubs between India and China, kind of like how the Kathmandu Valley of Nepal rose to prominence as an important trade hub between India and Tibet. The modern-day Bamar ethnic group, who comprise Myanmar's majority and who are better known as the Burmese people, are first attested in historical records as a new group of, quote, swift horsemen from the north. These were the Mranma, or Burmans, of the Nanzhao kingdom, who began raiding the Pew city-states in the 9th century. According to Tang Dynasty chronicles, the Nanzhao began their raids of Upper Burma starting as early as 754 or 760. By 763, the Nanzhao king, Kolofeng, had conquered the upper Irrawaddy Valley. Kolofeng had previously established an alliance with the Tibetans against the Tang dynasty. Kolofeng had subsequently accepted a Tibetan title, and he acted as part of the Tibetan Empire, at least until 794 when Nanzhao switched over to the Tang under Kolofeng's successor, Yimo Shun. The Nanzhao's raids on the Pew intensified in the 9th century, with the Nanzhao raiding in 800 to 802 frequently, and again 6 years later between 808 to 809 CE. Finally, according to the Tang records, in 832 the Nanzhao warriors completely overran the Pew city-states and took away 3,000 Pew prisoners from Halin. Pew settlements, however, remained in Upper Burma for the next 3 centuries, but the Pew gradually were absorbed and assimilated into the expanding Pagan empire established by the Burmese. The Pew language still existed until the late 12th century, but by the 13th century the Pew had all but assumed the Burmese ethnicity and disappeared into history. The Nanzhao kingdom mostly comprised what is now Yunnan province in southwestern China. It was known as Changyul by the Tibetans, and there are some historians who believe that among the aforementioned swift horsemen from the north, there were warriors from the Tibetan Empire itself among them. since during the 8th century, when these Nanzhao raids on the Pyu were happening, the Tibetan Empire was at its height, and coincidentally, the Nanzhao king himself was acting on behalf of the Tibetan Empire. The descendants of the Nanzhao kingdom's primary ethnic groups, the Yi and Bai people, exist to this day and continue to live in Yunnan and frequently coexist with Tibetans. In fact, for both the aforementioned Yi people, the Pyu people, and the Burmese people themselves, the ancestral homeland of each of these groups have all been agreed upon by scholars to be northeastern Tibet, particularly around the area of Tsongön or Qinghai Lake. And if you take a look at artifacts from the Pyu period, particularly these beads have patterns remarkably similar to modern Tibetan Dzi Beads. These beads are sacred to Tibetans living around Qinghai Lake. It is my opinion that this is not just coincidence, but that these similarities between these beads hint at cultural and trade connections between the Pyu and their ancestral homeland on the Tibetan Plateau. The linguistic connection between Tibet and Myanmar is evident through their shared, literally Tibeto-Burman language family. The Tibeto-Burman languages are a subgroup of the Sino-Tibetan language family and span a vast region from the Tibetan Plateau to Northeast India and Southeast Asia, although it has been agreed that the Tibetan Plateau is the ultimate source of all of these languages. So at the very beginning, all the Tibeto-Burman speaking ethnic groups, except for those who ended up speaking those languages as a result of assimilation, were living in Tibet. The fact that the primary language of Myanmar, Burmese, belongs to this language family, as do many minority languages spoken in Myanmar, such as Kachin, Karen, Mizo, Jingpo, Rakhine, and many other Tibeto-Burman languages, points to ancient migrations and cultural exchanges between the people of Tibet and Myanmar over many millennia. A large percentage of Tibetans in the modern day are nomadic. A few thousand years ago, it was likelier that all Tibetans were nomadic. So the spread of Tibeto-Burman languages by the movement of peoples across the Tibetan Plateau and the foothills of the Himalayas, following the extensive river systems out of Tibet and into beautiful, fertile areas of lower altitude, outlying lands, all but make perfect sense. Genetic studies have shown considerable similarities between the mitochondrial DNA of the Bamar people, or the Burmese people of Myanmar, and that of Tibetan populations. These genetic markers suggest a shared ancestry or ancient intermarriage between the ancient Tibetan settlers with the Mon peoples and other indigenous, mostly Thai or Mon Khmer groups already present in the region. In this way, the formation of Myanmar's ethnic groups kind of mirrors the ethnogenesis that occurred in ancient Nepal, where Tibeto-Burman groups similarly arrived over the Himalayas and mingled with Indo-Aryan and Dravidian groups to give rise to modern-day Nepalese people. Recent research by the Max Planck Institute for Evolutionary Anthropology has identified shared genetic markers between the Burmese and Tibetan peoples, indicating a common ancestry that dates back thousands of years. This genetic connection, combined with linguistic and historical evidence, underscores the deep-rooted ties between the Tibetan Plateau and Myanmar. Beyond language, genetics, and direct influence, there are also significant cultural parallels that Tibet has with Myanmar. The diffusion of Buddhism, particularly Theravada Buddhism, played a crucial role in the religious transformation of Myanmar. The Pyu city-states were the first in Southeast Asia to embrace Theravada Buddhism, serving as a bridge between India and the rest of Southeast Asia. Similarly, in Tibet, the diffusion of Vajrayana Buddhism, as opposed to Theravada Buddhism, played a crucial role in the religious transformation of Tibet. In Tibet, the indigenous Bön religion has absorbed many elements from Buddhism to the point where one would be hard-pressed to distinguish it from just another sect of Tibetan Buddhism. Likewise, in Myanmar, the Burmese folk religion practiced by the Bamar has highly syncretized with Buddhism to the point where it is nearly indistinguishable from Buddhism. The historical legacy of Tibet is complex and multifaceted, encompassing early migrations that brought the progenitors of the Pew city-states from the Tibetan Plateau, as well as the linguistic and genetic connections that continue to bind Tibetans with the Tibeto-Burman speaking peoples of Myanmar. While often overshadowed by other influences like that of India or China, Tibet's impact on Myanmar is an essential chapter in understanding the historical development of this Southeast Asian nation. Further research in archaeology, linguistics, and genetics will continue to eliminate the ancient relationship between Tibet and Myanmar. Thank you all so much for tuning back into Eclectic Explorations. Please continue to like so that the YouTube algorithm continues to notice me, share, and if you haven't already, please subscribe. I'll see you all next time.